Hello, my name is Katherine Kramer from Interaction. The purpose of this video is to brief facilitators on how best to deliver the training on optimizing armed actor engagement for protection outcomes. The training module is composed of a PowerPoint presentation and a facilitator's guide. The facilitator's guide is intended to provide comprehensive guidance for facilitators to deliver the material according to the process suggested. Here you have the table of contents for the facilitator's guide. Those sections highlighted in orange relate to the PowerPoint slides. The sections highlighted in green relate to the exercise material used throughout the training. The rest of the material is there to assist the organizers and facilitators. I'm now going to go over the key elements to prepare for the training. In terms of participants, the training works best if they number between 24 and 30. They should be a diverse mix of men and women from UN agencies and local and international NGOs that are responsible for protection and engaging with armed actors, for example, civil military coordinators, access advisors, etc. Ideally, the training would be for participants working in the same context, but it can also be organized regionally or globally, although the latter is not recommended if online, as it would be difficult to find a time convenient for everyone. Facilitators should get to know their participants before the training. This will help pre-identify people that can be called on to answer questions to avoid long silences, as well as participants that can assist with small group moderation. The ideal number of participants per small group is 6, thus between 4 to 5 small groups, and be sure to play with the composition. Ideally, the training will have 2 facilitators, although this is not mandatory. Make sure that the facilitator is well supported with someone dedicated to logistics and IT if the training is online, and someone who can take notes of participants' questions, responses, experiences, and feedback. All facilitators should email Erin Weir at Interaction to gain editors' access to the Google Forms used for the quiz and surveys. This will allow facilitators to download their participants' responses in order to create graphs to share responses back to the participants. Please note that the Google Forms collect responses from everyone who has ever taken the training. Please do not change any of the questions on the Google form. The module has been designed for both in-person and online trainings. If in person, make sure to have sufficient wall space for exercises and to be able to set up the room for 4 to 5 tables seating 6 people each, as well as space for facilitators and support staff with ample room in between. If online, be sure that everyone's name, as well as their primary role or organization, is visible along with their image. Currently, all training material is in English. Plans are underway to translate the material into French. If other translations are made, please share it with Interaction so that others can benefit as well. When additional languages are available, they will be uploaded to the training module webpage. There is a list of resources for the material covered in the training on pages 35 and 36 of the Facilitator's Guide. This should be distributed to all participants in the pre-training packet. Note that for each slide, the relevant resources are listed. If it is an online training, be sure to share these with participants in the chat as you go through the slide. Before each slide, download the most up-to-date PowerPoint from Interaction's webpage. If possible, view the slides in the most recent version of Microsoft PowerPoint to ensure the layout is correct. If the training is conducted offline, make sure to have available flip charts, markers, large post-it notes or index cards, and masking tape. If there is no internet connection, make sure to have printouts of the quiz and all surveys. For an online training, a whiteboard or Google Slides for the relevant exercises will need to be prepared in advance. The setup necessary for each slide is indicated in the facilitator's guide. At least a week before the training, make sure to share with participants a pre-training packet, which at the very minimum should include the agenda, the list of resources, and the case studies if they are being used. Interaction will be monitoring the impact of the training module. Details of the monitoring process can be found on page 33 of the Facilitator's Guide. To aid in this process, we ask facilitators to share with Interaction workshop reports, including participants' questions, responses, experiences, feedback, and the quiz and surveys if the training was offline. In the surveys, we ask participants to provide some personal information, personal emails, employer, and posting, so that we can track not just for the individual, but also for the context and organization in which they work. Those participants that indicate in the workshop evaluation that they agree to participate in the monitoring process will receive 2 follow-up surveys over the course of a 12-month period and may also be contacted for an interview. For convenience, we've included a minimum estimated time allotment per slide according to the process suggested in the facilitator's guide. Be aware that it may take longer, especially if changes are made to the process. We understand that every training must be flexible to the audience and time available. The minimum estimated time allotment for the training is 352 minutes, approximately 6 hours, not counting breaks for coffee and lunch. But it could also be modified to fit within a few hours of a larger training program. Facilitators may choose to adapt the training by contextualizing it. There are additional slides at the back of the PowerPoint for this purpose, or they may wish to add more small group exercises or polls. Please keep in mind that the training should be as interactive as possible, allowing participants to relate the content to their work and share their own experiences. I'm now going to walk through the slides, highlighting important points for your reference. The title slide will be used for the welcome, introductions, and logistical information. Make sure before the training to add the training's location, date, and time, as well as the facilitator's name on the slide. For each slide, the facilitator's guide contains the purpose of the slide as well as the suggested process for conveying the relevant information. Additional information for the facilitator will be in colored boxes throughout, the content of which can be shared with participants as needed. Suggested questions the facilitator can pose to participants are indicated with a question mark. It is important that all participants who undergo the training walk away with a common understanding. The important information to convey to participants is indicated by an explanation/key points under process. If the training will include the storytelling session, make sure to ask for volunteers when discussing the agenda. Information on what stories should contain are included on this slide and can be shared with participants in the pre-training packet. A section slide, like this one, divides each agenda item. With the exception of agenda item 4, Shifting Challenges into Enablers, slide 31, none of the section slides include action to be taken. Notice here the symbol that indicates an embedded link. For online trainings, the facilitator should be able to copy and paste the resource links into the chat function of whichever online communication platform is being used without difficulty. When you come to learning objectives, it is very important to manage participants' expectations. This can be done by highlighting any divergences between what the training will address and expectations shared in the introductions. For example, they may have expectations that they will learn how to engage with armed actors. This is not the content of this training. There are many other trainings available that cover this topic. When delivering slide 7, note the key points that should be conveyed to participants. Questions 1 and 2 can solicit feedback from participants in terms of the definitions their organizations use. Some organizations may not have a definition. It would also be good to ask participants their understanding of the tasks that these people undertake. Question 3. Some examples are included in the box. It is important to start building an understanding among participants as to what we mean by armed actors by first asking them the question, what armed actors have you come across where you work? Slide 8 only provides the list of armed actors, not their definitions. If needed, the definitions are provided in the facilitator's guide. If participants ask which category a specific armed actor falls into, try to get them to answer the question themselves, and then ask how they determine this. The key here is who makes decisions and where command control for the armed actor lies. We also included the definition of duty bearers here if needed. Many humanitarians still do not have a common understanding of protection, much less what encompasses protection work, thus our inclusion of slide 9. We suggest starting by questioning participants, what is your understanding of protection? You have to click on the slide to show the definition after the discussion. A second click will show the definition of protection work according to the IASC. Slide 10 is a quick survey of 3 questions to test participants' knowledge of the centrality of protection. If participants have internet access, they can follow the link provided on the slide. If the training is online, make sure to put the link in the chat. If participants do not have access to the internet, print and distribute the survey available on page 37. Provide 3 minutes for the participants to complete the survey. When the time is up, if desired, present graphically the results from the Google form. Remember to only use those responses made by participants from this training, as the form will collect responses from all trainings. If participants use the handout, read out the correct responses provided in the facilitator's guide, and a quick raise of hands can show how many got all the questions correct. This is another slide that requires clicking to view the additional information. Facilitators may notice that Charles Petrie's report does not appear in the resources for the slide. This was provided for the facilitator's reference and does not need to be shared with participants. To explore the second and third underlying principle of the centrality of protection, it is advised for the participants to think through them via a set of questions asked to them. Also note that when the explanation of the slide continues to the next page, you will find this indicator. When we talk about protection outcomes, we are talking about reducing or removing the protection risks that affected communities are facing, not the ones that humanitarian actors are facing. Reducing risk is done by changing the behavior, attitudes, policies, and practices of relevant stakeholders. It is for this reason that engaging with armed actors is so important. This exercise is to be undertaken in plenary. If online, facilitators can use a whiteboard prepared in advance. Although it is recommended to only show the risk part of the table for now, it can also be done using a flip chart. As adults learn best by doing, once the key points have been conveyed, ask participants to provide one example of a risk of violence, then coercion, then deliberate deprivation, in the context in which they work. This can also be done with participants working in different contexts. Hypotheticals are also a possibility. The examples on this slide, yellow sticky notes, are from Pemba, Mozambique. Hold on to the results of this exercise as they will be used again later. The sole purpose of this slide is to familiarize participants with the 15 protection risks that the GPC tracks, but emphasize that this list does not contain all protection risks experienced by people in different contexts. The protection risk equation is important for participants to understand protection outcomes. Remember, a protection outcome is the reduction or removal of risks from violence, coercion, or deliberate deprivation that affected communities are facing by changing the behavior, attitude, policies, and practices of relevant stakeholders. This is achieved by reducing the threat by a perpetrator, reducing the vulnerability of persons to that threat, and or increasing the capacity of a person or group to resist or rebound from the effects of that threat. The term protection of civilians, or POC, comes up frequently when dealing with militaries. The purpose of the next few slides is for participants to understand the relationship between POC and protection outcomes. In short, POC comprises the efforts of armed actors themselves to prevent or mitigate protection risks. What is on this slide is an explanation of what POC is, not a definition, as we see in the subsequent slides how POC is defined by different militaries. The next few slides show the protection of civilians definitions of the African Union, NATO, the UN peace operations, and the U.S. Department of Defense's definition of civilian harm. Even non-state armed groups have policies related to the protection of civilians. See, for example, theirwords.org, although this is not updated. What is important after sharing the definitions is to inquire whether anyone has used an armed actor's own policy as a basis for protection dialogue, or if they can think of a hypothetical situation or case where this would be useful. For slide 23, just click on the arrow to play the embedded 5-minute video. It is an introduction to how to achieve protection outcomes. There really isn't a need to discuss the video, as the following slides will cover the content. This slide has a lot going on. First, it introduces the protection risk analysis. Second, it provides an example of what this would look like through a real case of Bambari, Central African Republic. Third, it is an opportunity in plenary to complete the table started in slide 25. For each risk, participants should identify a threat, vulnerability, and capacity. Again, these should be drawn from their own experiences. Note that this slide, as well as the next few slides, give examples of how humanitarians who engage with armed actors can contribute to the process explained on the slide. After conveying the key points regarding strategy development, action planning, it is time for the small group exercise. It is anticipated that participants, having walked through the risk equation themselves in plenary and having seen a couple of examples, will feel comfortable doing it themselves in small groups. Ideally, participants can go through the exercise using the context in which they work, if they are all from the same one. This way, they have something they can use after the training. If they are from different contexts, a case study is needed, which should be shared in the pre-training packet. One or both of the case studies we've provided can be used. It is not a problem if small groups are working on the same case study. While the full instructions for the exercise is in the facilitator's guide, it is important for small groups to identify one risk they will work on, identify specific interventions for humanitarians engaging with armed actors, such as SIMCORD officers and humanitarian access advisors, and identify the protection outcome they hope to achieve, basically, what a reduction in risk would look like. Most humanitarians find monitoring progress towards achieving protection outcomes daunting. Developing indicators that can be used to compare progress over time can help this process and should be included in the action plan. It is suggested to ask the small groups what indicator they could use to indicate progress was being made in the exercise they just completed. This is a real case example from Uganda, which shows how different actors came together and collectively achieved a protection outcome. I've highlighted the key points on the slide. The purpose of this slide is for participants to come together and think about the added value in terms of skills, experience, and network humanitarians engaging with armed actors can bring to achieving protection outcomes. While the slide gives some general ideas, the exercise explores it according to each stage in the protection outcome process: protection risk analysis, strategy, action planning, implementation, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. If in person, this can be organized as an around-the-world activity, where all small groups cycle through all stations, although time should be adjusted accordingly. The benefit of this approach is that it gets people moving, and they also have a chance to see what groups before them wrote. Otherwise, have each group work on answering one question. It is recommended to switch up the small groups, again, playing with the composition. As with the quiz, the survey is available via the link on the slide to a Google form. If participants do not have internet access, provide it as a handout. See page 43 of the Facilitator's Guide. This survey will form the baseline for monitoring the impact of the training over the long term. Subsequent surveys that will be sent to willing participants are based off of these same questions. We ask participants' personal emails, as we know people change employers and positions frequently. The survey shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. Feel free to share the survey results, being aware that the form collects survey results from all participants that have ever taken the training. While the humanitarian coordinator and humanitarian country team are responsible for leading the entire protection outcome process, how this is done is dependent on the specific context. This also means that the appropriate coordination platforms for achieving protection outcomes are not the same in every context. Rather, they are set up on a needs basis. The exercise, using a word cloud application or index cards, tries to dig into the coordination platforms available, who is involved, and are they appropriate for armed actor engagement for protection outcomes. If the existing platforms are not sufficient, does one need to be created? If so, who should be included? This session is to allow participants to share their own experiences using armed actor engagement to achieve protection outcomes. It does require advanced setup. When explaining the agenda, be sure to ask for volunteers to come forward in advance. Start off the exercise by giving a maximum of 5 minutes to each volunteer to share their story. This exercise has a tendency to snowball by motivating others to share their own stories. Allow time for this. Do not discuss the stories until after all stories are shared. At that point, point out commonalities, differences, and lessons learned. Be sure to thank all participants for sharing their stories. Allow at least 30 minutes for the session, but this can take longer. For this slide, it is important to identify the challenges that participants face in terms of engaging with armed actors to achieve protection outcomes. Some may be on this slide, others may be missing. For those challenges that the participants identify with, discuss how the challenges can be shifted into enablers, or in other words, how to overcome the challenges. More details on the enablers presented here are in the explanation section of the Facilitator's Guide. Participants may disagree with the enablers or even present new ones. For new challenges shared, see if the participants themselves can propose ways in which to overcome them. As with other Google Forms surveys, the training evaluation can also be found on page 43 of the Facilitator's Guide for those cases where there is not access to the internet. It should take no more than 15 minutes. It is also highly advisable to go back through the training expectations shared by participants during the self-introductions and have participants vote on whether their training expectations were met. When ready to close the training, make sure to ask if there are any final questions. Share any next steps that are planned or which have been decided on during the training. Thank all the participants as well as the organizers, etc. And that concludes the briefing on how to use the training module on optimizing armed actor engagement for protection outcomes. I hope that this video has been helpful, and I wish very good trainings for all of you.